I'm 86. The day I saved someone's life, I destroyed my own family. The day I became a hero to strangers was the day I lost my own family. My name is Frank Donahue. I'm 86 years old, and I've spent 43 years trying to reconcile how the best thing I ever did cost me everything that mattered. It happened on November 12, 1982. I was a police officer in a small city in upstate New York, 21 years on the force. I was 43, married to Sarah for 18 years. We had 3 children, Danny, 16, Michael, 14, and Lisa, 11. We were a normal family living a normal life in a normal house on a street where everyone knew everyone. That Friday evening, I was off duty. It was supposed to be my weekend with the family. Sarah planned a camping trip upstate. The car was packed, kids excited. We'd leave Saturday morning. I looked forward to it. 2 days away from the job, just me and my family in the woods. Around 7 that evening, I was in the garage organizing fishing gear when I heard the call on my police scanner. I kept one at home, always listened, even off duty. The call, domestic disturbance, 3 blocks away. Neighbors reported screaming, possible shots fired. All units in the area were requested to respond. I stood there in my garage, listening to that call, and I had a choice to make. I was off duty. Other officers were responding. I had no obligation to get involved. My family was waiting for me. We had plans. This was supposed to be our time together. But I also knew that address. I'd been called there twice before, over the years for domestic incidents. Robert Henley lived there with his wife Karen and their 2 young children. Robert had a history of violence, a drinking problem, and several arrests for assault. Both previous times I'd been there, Karen had refused to press charges, insisted everything was fine, sent us away. Standard pattern for domestic abuse situations. Something about this call felt different. Possible shots fired. That changed the equation. If there were guns involved and children in the house, this wasn't just another domestic call. This could be life or death. I made a decision in about 10 seconds. I told Sarah I had to respond to a call, that it sounded serious, that I'd be back in maybe an hour. She was disappointed, but understanding. She'd been a cop's wife for 18 years. She knew how it worked. I kissed her, told the kids I'd be back soon, and I left. I drove to the Henley house and found 2 patrol cars already there. The officers were at the front door, but no one had gone inside yet. Robert Henley was visible through the front window, and he was holding a gun. His wife Karen and their 2 children, ages 6 and 8, were huddled together on the couch. The situation had escalated, from a domestic disturbance to a hostage situation. I wasn't the ranking officer on scene, but I had the most experience with this particular family, so I took point on negotiations. We spent the next 2 hours trying to talk Robert down. He was drunk, angry, making threats. He said he'd kill his family and then himself. He waved the gun around. He fired a shot into the ceiling at one point, just to prove he was serious. The whole time I was there, I was thinking about my own family at home, about Sarah and the kids waiting for me, about the camping trip we were supposed to be preparing for, about how I'd said I'd be back in an hour. It was already past that, and I had no idea when this would end. But I couldn't leave. There were children in that house with a drunk, armed man who was threatening to kill them. Every instinct I had as a cop and as a father told me I needed to stay, needed to see this through, needed to do everything I could to get those kids out safely. Around 9:30, we got a break. Karen managed to get the children to a back bedroom, while Robert was distracted. We had officers positioned at the back of the house, and they were able to extract the kids and Karen through a bedroom window. Once they were safe, we had options. We could wait Robert out, or we could go in. The decision was made to breach. Robert was still armed, still threatening violence, and we couldn't risk him hurting himself or someone else. I was part of the entry team. We went through the front door, moved through the house, found Robert in the living room, still holding the gun. I won't go into all the details of what happened next, but it ended with Robert being shot. Not killed, but wounded badly enough that he went down, and we were able to secure the weapon. He survived, eventually went to prison, but in that moment, we'd neutralized the threat. The crisis was over. By the time I got home that night, it was almost midnight. The house was dark. Everyone was in bed. I went upstairs and found Sarah awake, sitting up reading. She looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, but something colder. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. She asked where I'd been for 5 hours. I explained what had happened. I told her about the hostage situation, the armed subject, the children we'd rescued. I expected her to understand, to be relieved I was okay, to see that I'd done what I had to do. Instead, she said, "You chose them over us." I didn't understand what she meant at first. I tried to explain that it wasn't a choice, that there were children in danger, that I couldn't just ignore that. She said I could have. I was off duty. Other officers were there. I could have stayed home with my own family like I'd promised. I said she was being unfair, that she'd always understood the demands of the job, that this was different because children's lives were at stake. She said our children's lives were at stake too, maybe not in the same immediate way, but that every time I chose the job over them, I was teaching them that other people mattered more than they did. We had a fight that night that I'd never forget. Not a screaming match. Sarah wasn't like that. But a quiet, cold confrontation where she laid out years of resentment I hadn't known existed. She said this wasn't the first time I'd broken promises for the job. It wasn't the first time I'd put strangers ahead of our family. It was just the most obvious, the most impossible to rationalize away. She said the camping trip wasn't just a weekend vacation. It was supposed to be a chance for us to reconnect as a family. The kids were getting older, pulling away, becoming their own people. Danny was having trouble in school. Michael was hanging out with kids Sarah was worried about. Lisa was withdrawing, spending all her time alone in her room. We were losing them, Sarah said. Instead of being there to help hold the family together, I was 3 blocks away saving someone else's family. I tried to defend myself. I said I was a police officer, that protecting people was my job, my calling, my responsibility. Sarah said being a husband and father was also my responsibility, and that I'd been failing at that for years, while congratulating myself for being good at my job. She asked me a question I couldn't answer then, and still struggle with now. She asked if the Henley children's lives were more valuable than my own children's well-being. If saving those strangers was more important than being present for my own kids. If being a hero to people I didn't know mattered more than being a father to the people who needed me most. I said it wasn't about value or importance. It was about immediate need. Those children were in imminent danger. My children were safe at home. How could I have lived with myself if I'd stayed home? And those kids had died? Sarah said, "And how do you live with yourself when your own kids grow up barely knowing their father? Because you were always saving someone else?" We didn't go on the camping trip that weekend. The mood was ruined. Sarah barely spoke to me. The kids knew something was wrong, but didn't know what. We all just moved through the house, in this heavy silence, pretending everything was normal while it clearly wasn't. The following week, I was recognized by the city for my role in resolving the hostage situation. There was a ceremony. The mayor gave me a commendation. The local newspaper ran a story calling me a hero. Corinne Henley and her children were there, and they thanked me for saving their lives. It should have been one of the proudest moments of my career. But my family wasn't there. Sarah refused to come. She said she wasn't going to celebrate me abandoning our family to help strangers. Danny, Michael, and Lisa stayed home with her. So I stood there accepting this award, being called a hero. Knowing that my own wife and children thought I'd failed them, the marriage didn't survive. Sarah filed for divorce about 6 months later. She said she'd spent 18 years competing with my job for my attention. She was tired of losing. She'd tried to be understanding, tried to accept that being married to a cop meant making sacrifices. But that night in November had shown her I would always choose the job over her and the kids, and she couldn't live with that anymore. The divorce was brutal. Not in terms of fighting over assets or custody. Sarah wasn't vengeful. It was brutal because it forced me to confront what I'd done to my family over the years. All the missed dinners, the broken promises, the times I'd chosen work over them. The camping trip was just the final, undeniable example of a pattern I'd been repeating for their entire lives. My relationship with my children never really recovered. They were teenagers during the divorce, old enough to understand what had happened, old enough to choose sides. They chose their mother. I don't blame them. She'd been the one who was always there, who showed up for their school events, who listened to their problems, who made them feel like they mattered. Danny barely spoke to me through the rest of high school. He went to college, and we grew even more distant. Now he's in his 50s, and we talk maybe twice a year, stilted conversations where we update each other on basic facts, but never discuss anything real. Michael got into serious trouble as a teenager after the divorce. Drugs, petty crime, things that might have been prevented if I'd been more present in his life. He eventually got himself straightened out, but our relationship was damaged beyond repair. He tells people he doesn't have a father. Lisa tried the hardest to maintain their relationship with me, but it was always strained. She'd call dutifully on my birthday and Father's Day. She invited me to her wedding, though I could tell it was out of obligation rather than genuine desire. She has children now, my grandchildren, who I barely know. Sarah remarried a few years after our divorce. A good man, from what I understand, someone who was present for her in ways I never was. She died 5 years ago. I went to the funeral, and my children were polite but distant. I was a stranger at my ex-wife's funeral, someone who used to be important but wasn't anymore. I spent the rest of my career in law enforcement, another 18 years, before I retired. I was good at my job. I made detective, solved a lot of cases, helped a lot of people. I received more commendations, more recognition, more thanks from strangers whose lives I'd impacted. But I went home to an empty apartment every night. I spent holidays alone. I watched my children grow up from a distance, learning about their lives through occasional phone calls and Facebook updates. I became exactly what Sarah had predicted. I would become a man who was a hero to people who didn't know him, and a failure to the people who did. I think about that night in November 1982 all the time. I've gone over it in my mind thousands of times, trying to figure out if I made the right choice, if there was some other option I didn't see, if I could have done things differently. Corinne Henley and her children are alive. There's a very real possibility that Robert would have killed them. My presence made a difference. Maybe not a decisive difference. Other officers could have handled it, but I contributed to saving their lives. My marriage ended because I responded to that call. That's also a fact. If I'd stayed home that night, if I'd honored my commitment to my family, if I'd let other officers handle the situation, Sarah wouldn't have filed for divorce 6 months later. Or maybe she still would have eventually. Maybe the problems were deeper than one broken camping trip. But that night was the breaking point. So which choice was right? Do I measure the value of my decision by the lives I helped save? Or by the family I destroyed? Do I prioritize the immediate, dramatic needs of strangers in crisis? Or the quieter, slower needs of my own children who are dying for my attention? Sarah thought the answer was obvious. My children think the answer is obvious. Most people, when I tell this story, think the answer is obvious. They say family comes first, that I should have stayed home, that other cops could have handled the situation, that I had no obligation to get involved when I was off duty. But I can't accept that answer. I can't accept that the right choice was to stay home while children were in danger 3 blocks away. I was a trained police officer. I had skills and experience that could help in that situation. How could I justify sitting in my garage, organizing fishing tackle, while kids were held hostage by an armed man? At the same time, I can't deny what my choice cost. My children needed me, and I wasn't there. Not just that night, but hundreds of nights throughout their childhoods. I was so focused on being a good cop, on serving and protecting the community, that I failed to serve and protect my own family. And that failure had consequences. Danny's struggles in school, Michael's trouble with drugs, Lisa's withdrawal and loneliness. These weren't inevitable. These were problems that might have been prevented or addressed if I'd been more present, more engaged, more willing to put them first. Sarah was right when she said I was teaching my children that strangers mattered more than they did. That's exactly what I was teaching them, through my actions, if not my words. And they learned that lesson well. They learned that their father would always choose duty over them, would always find a reason why someone else's needs were more urgent, more important, more worthy of his time and attention. I'm 86 years old now. I've been retired for over 20 years. I live alone in a small apartment. My children are polite when I call them, but they don't seek out my company. My grandchildren don't know me. I have no one to share my life with, no one who cares whether I live or die, beyond a generic kind of human concern. But I have my commendations. I have my newspaper clippings. I have the thank you letters from people I helped over my career. I have my reputation as a good cop, someone who served his community faithfully for 40 years. Is that enough? Was it worth it? I honestly don't know. I go back and forth. Some days I think I made the right choice that night in November, that I did what I was trained to do, what I was obligated to do, what any decent person would have done. Some days I think Sarah was right, that I should have stayed home, that my family should have come first. That being a hero to strangers while failing my own children was the ultimate betrayal. Most days I just live with the ambiguity, with the knowledge that there was no perfect choice, that any decision I made that night was going to hurt someone. Either I was going to fail the Henley family, or I was going to fail my own family. There was no option where everyone won. But I do know this. The cost of my heroism was higher than anyone acknowledged at the time. When the mayor gave me that commendation, when the newspaper called me a hero, when Karen Henley thanked me for saving her children, no one mentioned what I'd sacrificed. No one said, "Thank you for destroying your marriage and damaging your relationships with your children," because that wouldn't have fit the narrative. Heroes aren't supposed to have complicated personal lives that fall apart. Heroes are supposed to save the day and then go home to loving families who understand and support their sacrifices. That's the story we tell about people like me. But the reality is messier. The reality is that being a hero often comes at a cost. And sometimes that cost is paid by people who never chose to make that sacrifice. People like my children, who just wanted their father to come home like he promised. If you're someone who puts duty first, who believes in serving others, who feels called to help people in need, I understand that impulse. I lived that way my entire life. But I need you to be honest with yourself about what you're sacrificing and who's paying the price for your choices. Your family doesn't exist to support your heroism. Your children don't exist to understand why strangers sometimes matter more. Your spouse didn't marry you so they could raise kids alone while you save other people. And if you make the same choices I made, if you prioritize duty over family over and over again, you'll end up where I am, alone with nothing but your commendations and your memories, and the knowledge that you helped a lot of people who don't think about you anymore, while losing the people who needed you most. I saved the Henley family that night in November 1982. That's true. I'm proud of that. It was the right thing to do. But I also destroyed my own family. That's also true. And I can never get them back. Both of those things are real. Both of those consequences flow from the same decision. And I've spent 43 years living with that complexity, trying to figure out if being a hero was worth the cost. I still don't have an answer. I just have the life I'm living, the family I lost, and the strangers I saved, who have long since forgotten my name. That's the truth about heroism that nobody talks about. Sometimes saving lives destroys them too.